Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and thank you for being here tonight at our monthly series, A Librarian's World. This is a monthly session where our librarians share their experience, insights, and thoughts on the area of their expertise. Now, radio has played an important role as a broadcast medium to inform, educate, and entertain the masses. Thanks to generous donations received over the years, the National Library has built up a collection of radio scripts that were once broadcast over the radio. Tonight, we will be joined by Senior Librarian Juffri Supa'at, who will talk about the selection of vernacular language radio scripts, such as drama scripts and photographs related to the radio industry. Juffri is a senior librarian with the National Library, and he has curated several exhibitions featuring the works of Malay literary pioneers such as Masuri SN and Muhammad Arif Ahmad. He's also a poet and has authored several articles
That's not the least.
in the National Library's regular journal, Biblioasia. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Juffri Supa'at.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for making time to be here. As mentioned by my colleague Michelle, we are looking at some of the resources that we have at the library that we have donated, we have collected through donations over the years. Okay. Okay, let me give the context of this talk. Okay, I'm not going to cover everything on radio. The things that I'm going to cover today is basically what we have recently put up at the Donors Gallery at level 10, which is some of the donors' items that we have gotten. And for this particular round, we have kind of focus on the radio scripts that we have gotten from the Chinese, Malay, and the Tamil radios. And also there are some photograph magazines which later we can feast our eyes on it. Okay, the exhibitions or the showcase will be up, I think, for the next couple of months. So even after this talk, you are all welcome to go to level 10 and take a look at the exhibitions. You can see the scripts, the photograph, and some of the items that we have put it up there. Okay. So we will focus on some of these donors items and look at the significance of some of them. Okay. Okay, radio scripts at the National Library. As mentioned, radio existed basically because of broadcast medium. The three things that every people in the production will learn is inform, educate, and entertain the masses. That is still the functions of radio. Of course, throughout the years, it shifted a little bit from just information to education. Then at the moment, if you look, a lot of it is surrounding entertainment, depending on where you are, you know. So in a more so-called controlled countries, radios will just be used as a propaganda tool, like we have seen in the early years of radio and during the wars. Okay, another thing is that I mentioned earlier, over the years we have collected, even from the writers themselves or from some of the institutions like Radio Fusion that given us the collection. Okay, some of the items that from the writers themselves is like Mr. M.K. Narayanan, P. Krishnan, Fatima Jaluddin, No SI, and again I mentioned about the Radio Fusion. I think for some of us will be more familiar about Radio Fusion as compared to the younger ones because of the significance of radio fusions in the early years. Later I'll mention why. Okay, as I mentioned, I will concentrate on the Chinese, Malay, and Tamil. for this particular talk. Okay, a little bit, since we are talking about radio, a little bit of the history of radio. Okay, technically, 1935 is the first official broadcasting in Singapore. But as I mentioned here, you look, the British Malaya Broadcasting Corporation granted a monopoly license for radio broadcasting. But for Singapore, it seems that through the shortwave, we have been listening to BBC 10 years earlier. So although our broadcasting started in 1935, but we managed to listen to the BBC much earlier than that. Okay. Milestone of Radio. Interesting how it evolved. Like I mentioned, 36, 1942, Japanese occupation is known as Shonan Hoso Kyoku. Then, if you look, 1949, cable radio service, Radiofusion, is launched. Okay, later we see some of the Radiofusion's items that was donated here. 1952, radio moved to Caldecott Hill. 59, independence of Federation of Malaya. Then they established the Radio Singapore as an independent offshoot. So in 1963, it was renamed again, become Radio Malaysia because of the merger. Okay. 65, Radio Singapore renamed Radio Television Singapura, the Radio Television Singapore. FM started transmitting in 67, and the early part in 1982, you see radio, we simply have Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 3, Radio 4, Radio 5. I think that was a much simpler life back then. Radio 1, you have English, Radio 2 Malay, Radio 3 Mandarin, Radio 4 Tamil, and Radio 5, the classical music. Okay, then life starts to get interesting. In 87, those who grew up back then listen to the hip and funky Zoo 100.6 from Batam that causes a challenge to Singapore. I mean, I was young once, so that was channel that everyone will listen to, you know. So they go by the name of the animals like a zoo, and the reception was very clear back then. So then you see how the Singapore radio also revamped themselves to follow some of the ideas back then. And now you see how radio actually being segmentized according to the age group, the viewers, the listeners type. That's why I used to make a joke that you start usually with the perfect 10, the hip and funky radio station, but once you tune into the symphony or the gold 90.5, you know you are from which age group. So by telling me which radio that you listen to, most probably you can categorize, okay, you are from this generation, that generation. Even as a small community, the Malay had 2 radio stations. One is for the young, one is for the not so young. So these are some of the so-called development. When we look at the radio scripts, we try to understand how this goes, because content sometimes also follows the segment they try to attract. Okay? Okay, these are some of the publications that we have was donated by Mr. Tan Yok Seong. See, the 1945 to 1959 Radio Singapore Story of Progress. So if you compare like where we are now and what the book talks about back then, you see there's a lot of difference in terms of how the industry has evolved. Okay, for example, these are like some of the things as to what kind of radio program, the number of hours that they once played. Now I think turn on radio, you can switch on every channel, and with the internet, you can actually cross into international channel. Whether you can choose whether you want country, you want folk, is through the internet. You get so much more content that you can choose. Okay, radio fusion, I think we had a quite sizable numbers in terms of items donated, but unfortunately a lot is from the 70s onwards. We do not have much of the earlier stuff. So although they started here in 1949, the 1960s, 70s, they had this radio, the Chinese dialect programs had strong followings. And usually the Chinese coffee shop, they will have this box. Some of the houses will have that box, usually in the kitchen, that my experience is that they will have this Teochew opera thing. Although when I start reading about it, in fact, they have a lot more programs than the opera that I used to listen from the corridor of my neighbor's house, But this is something like, back then, apart from the public broadcaster that you have, this is a special one which is very popular. Okay? Okay, these are some of the samples of the pictures that we have from the donated items from the radio fusion. These are the bosses of the radio fusion back then. This is during the good times, before they start to dwindle with the new competitors, everything. Okay, what we have here is radio fusion times. Okay, we have this kind of magazines that reflect on not only the content, later I'll show you what is in some of these magazines. And if you look across some of this kind of a magazine, it's not only just a programming booklet or magazines, but it comprises of so many other things. Later I'll show you some of those things. It's like you buy a magazine, you get everything inside there. You got stories of movies, you get stories of politics, and what you have in the world at the moment is like everything all rojak mixed around in the magazines. Okay, and these are like the back page of the Radio Fusion Times. They have things like the advertisement, basically jewelry. I think back then it's still considered something that ladies or housewife will look for. It's, I think, one of the major advertising company. Okay, in this particular issue, editorial team of Radio Fusion Times notified readers that the magazine will be undergoing progressive changes in the content and layout. So over time, if you see how the layout of the magazine also changes to attract. But one thing I realized when I go through a lot of this magazine is that the pictures is always attractive ladies. I think it never failed to sell. Well, whatever we say, but this is what life is. Yeah. Okay. This one is a TV and radio magazine, inaugural as the first periodical published by the Radio Singapore. So, like I mentioned before, the content doesn't just go on entertainment or just on the programming schedule, but it includes the what they call as the news and also on current affairs. So it's like you buy the magazine, you get things, everything all inside. I'll show you samples of what the inside would look like. Okay. Okay, as mentioned here, this is donated by the family of the late Lin Chen. Okay, this again donated item, another cover from the TV and radio magazine. Okay, this one of the samples that we have from the inside cover. If you look, okay, this is what you would expect on a magazine consists of celebrities, pictures like this. But we also have pictures, information on the movies of the day. So they would have covers things on a review of some of the movies back then. Okay, these are I think some of the celebrities and some of the things that covered on current affairs. So, like I mentioned before, it's a magazine that contain everything. With radio and TV times, your knowledge of the day is covered. Everything is covered. The news, current affairs, the celebrities, movies, everything will be within the magazines. Okay? Okay, these are from the Singapore Children's Playhouse, which was founded to actually train children voice actors for the radio plays. It eventually extended to theatrical performance and even to televisions. Okay, these are some of the shots taken at the Radio Singapore during recording sessions. Okay, this must be one of the bigger studios during the early years. If you look at some of the trainings that they had for the children, I think nowadays you won't even see some of this equipment. The vinyl, I think, is now being replaced by digital items. So this basically has become an antiquated. Okay, some of these things, I think, if you look at it in terms of retrospective, a lot of things is actually recorded live, unlike now. Okay, now we would be like having sound effects, everything that you want to put into the programs, everything is all pre-packed. So the wonderful old days, you would have things like, even of making a footstep, I think they will do the sound effects in the studios. And if you are recording a symphony or you're recording an orchestra, they will be recording live. And if one person make a mistake, you got to restart the whole thing again. So now it's all with the digital equipment. You can just stop it and continue. So, but that was the technology back then, So these are some of the photograph that we have accumulated over the years, and which actually tells the story of what the radio industry is about. Okay, Lee Dai So, or my friend was teaching me, is supposed to be Lei Tai So, the Cantonese pronunciation, or there's another pronunciation. Okay, regarded as Singapore's most famous Cantonese storyteller, and I think this one of the famous character that was on the local Singapore and also Malaysia radio station. I think some of you would have fond memories of some of these characters that has played over the years. Basically from the 50s right up to the 60s. So, okay, this is another items that we have in the various languages, radio scripts. The good thing about these radio scripts also is that once you look at it from two perspectives, one is that it's being played over the radio as a performance. But sometimes when you look at it as a text, so it gives another perspective to a script. And another thing is about it. Some of the dramas that was portrayed or played over the radios, it gives an insights to some of the social development or whatever, depending on the kind of dramas that was put up. So for some of the researchers, sometimes if you look at the scripts and you look at the current affairs of the day, you can see like how the community actually evolved, because over time, if you look what kind of radio programs. Usually, drama will also reflect what the society is, because that's how I think most of the plays was created. So the things, events that happens give an inspiration for what drama they wanted to put up. So these are one of the examples of the Chinese radio plays that was in our collection. I think this is for during the Spring Festival, one of the Eve of New Year, wishing parents good health. Okay, we have a lot of these scripts. If you are interested, you can approach any one of us at the library, and we will lead you to the rest of the other scripts as well. As I mentioned, some of these scripts is already up at level 10, so you can take a look at the items itself. This item is actually from a quarter-inch audio reels. I did not take the picture of the quarter-inch itself, so it's basically the quarter-inch reels. So these are children's radio plays. The thing about the quarter-inch audio reels is that everything looks the same. So somehow, if you make an accident of cutting a different part of the audio reels, so you are going to have a hard time if everything you put in a basket, because there's no label. So what you need to do is to patch everything up and start listening back to the quarter-inch. It's a very tedious process. So now the technician will be happy because they are now having all the digitized things, so it's just a matter of cut and paste. So yeah, this in terms of the machines also, I think not many institutions will still be using the quarter-inch machine. So some of the key things will be soon converted into digital as well. Okay, the Tamil radio scripts. Some of the key players that we got is from Mr. M.K. Narayanan and P. Krishnan, who were part of the Radio Singapore, and they have produced numerous radio plays. So again, as I mentioned, some of the program is like serialized radio version of the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, and some of the things of the Tamil community, especially in the 60s, whereby I think radio is still an important feature in every household. Okay, we have some of his scripts up there, and you can come and take a look. Another thing about the scripts is that if you look at the original scripts that was donated, some of it they would have edit along the way when they are producing it. So they would have some other remarks that along the way some of the scripts may change. So these are some of the things whereby people will still look for the so-called the earlier script, because what is produced might not be from a clean script, because along the way they could have changed some of the content of the scripts. Okay, these are like the front page whereby they would have the name of the characters of the scripts. Okay, the thing about this author is that he kept a schedule of the title of his script, so he was very meticulous. So you can actually trace what scripts or what plays that he gave for radio, and also when it was produced. So we have his catalog or logbook that you can take a look. Okay, finally we look at the scripts that we got from the Malay playwrights. Okay, I will highlight some of it, especially on the Bangsawan, because I'll give a little bit background of the Bangsawan first, so that we can appreciate how eventually, when it comes to radio, how the bangsawan actually changes or evolve. Okay. Okay, bangsawan, or some people call it the Malay opera. This is like some of the maps that look into how it was spread. If you look, some people say that bangsawan actually started in Penang, but the talents are actually from all over the Malay archipelago, from Sumatra. However, if you trace that the development, it came to Singapore, and that's where bangsawan started to prosper, especially in the 20s and the 30s. You goes on to, these are some of the famous bangsawan group that made the name during that time. But if you look at some of the things along the way, especially when the coming of the film industry, bangsawan started to go down. Okay, so that's where if you look at the evolution of the bangsawan, it started to pick up again when radio came in. Another thing about bangsawan is that, as far as I know, a lot of the production wasn't like what we have now, proper script. They will just tell, okay, today we are going to do a play, then get the actors, okay, you play this role, that role, and everybody will somehow come in and perform. And they only know the storyline, but the so-called what they're going to say is all depending on how they adapt. Another thing about bangsawan is also a very, I would say, quite international, because they perform the Persian stories, Shakespeare's. It's a kind of a mix, melting pot kind of a production. And eventually, when it goes to radio, that kind of system doesn't work. So radio, you have a limited airtime, fixed. That's why when we got some of the bangsawan script, we were like, this could be what is known as a first scripted bangsawan, as compared to what they used to be. Okay. See, some of the costumes in the bangsawan. The word bangsawan itself is very regal. You know, when say you are from the bangsawan clan, that means you are from the atas group of people. That's why a lot of bangsawan, we have those bright, the bling bling type of costumes. And in between the bangsawan, you have fillers when they change the set. These are some of the things that happen on bangsawan. Next picture is the newer type of the bangsawan that we have currently. So, but it doesn't measures up to the height of golden age of bangsawan, which is in the 20s, 30s, and even right up to the 40s. Okay. Okay, that's why when Amana Mustafi said that she found some bangsawan script, we were like quite delighted, because I think it's something that we can't get. I think only when they started to perform the bangsawan over the radios, where they have a proper script for bangsawan. Other than that, I think it's all like a very spontaneous kind of performing culture. So for this particular one, I think it was written by Jah Lelawati. Also another writer which is very difficult to get her works. She started writing, I think, in the 50s, and is only like one of the 8 women writers when they first started in the 50s. So I think most of her works have disappeared somehow. Unfortunately, we only have a small number of her works. So when we got this, it was like, this could be a gem, because we have something to look at for us to refer to a certain extent. Okay, what happened is that the bangsawan on air or the bangsawan on radio was usually they played about 12 series over a period of 6 weeks or 12 weeks, And every week during that time, the followers will wait just to sit and hear the bangsawan. Yeah? So, in fact, when the bangsawan radio started, it kind of create a certain, for example, the intro music of the bangsawan, so which do not have in the previous performing stage. It came to the radio. Then I think the producer might have chosen some music that eventually the music is known as, oh, that's a bangsawan song. Even though it wasn't created for bangsawan, it was just like the another minus one that was used and on air repeatedly. So it became the bangsawan song until now. When we hear the tune, it's referred to as a bangsawan song. Okay. Another thing is that during the early days, there was this lady. The bangsawan on radio will start with a syair, like a rhythmic kind of opener. So before they start the storyline. So just imagine how the majestic costume, the bright colors need to be transferred over the radio. That's where the imagination is. So we see how like the use of the actors in terms of the words and all those. That's why they have like when people started to follow the intonation of the bangsawan. For example, when the commoners will say "Ampun Tuanku" means how Your Majesty, something like that. They have the rhythmic like "Ampun Tuanku." Then you know, oh, that's a bangsawan. So somehow radio has fashioned some of this, because you remember, for radio you only have voices for you to listen to. Okay. Okay, these are the other series that I mentioned the word earlier about inform, educate, and entertain. So this radio script, Pantun Pusaka, falls under that category. The writers actually wrote every week there's a certain theme. For example, some of these particular theme will be on love. So we'll have all the love pantuns, and also explain the meaning of some of the symbols that was used in the pantun. So they have, I think the series runs for about 20 or 30 weeks. So it was very popular back then. Okay, this is also one of the gems that we got. The Gubahan Kisah Sejarah is something on history. The one that we put up at the level 10 is on Raffles and Munshi Abdullah. I think currently the bicentennial, these two names keep cropping up. So somehow they have a series. One episode is on Munshi Abdullah, the other episode is on Raffles. So Buyong Adil was a teacher, but eventually I think he wrote a couple of books on the history of Singapore, although he was like a de facto historian. So and he was, I think after his retirement, he was seconded to the radio station, and he created this series of history stories. Okay, last one. Item donated by No SI. This is on Puisi Rama. It's drama written in verses. It's a skill. No SI happened to be a poet as well. I think that's why he managed to be able to write his scripts. That means from the beginning to an end in a rhythmic verses. So for those who are into poetry, all those, will look at this as very interesting. And we have like 32 in a series. So it's like a huge collection in itself. And I I first heard about it was when it was written, I think in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And I think until now, he's the only one who has done this. So far, nobody else has actually able to do that style. Uh, at least in Singapore, I can say that. Okay, I think that's about it. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer. If not, I'll try and get some of my colleagues who might know more.
My question is whether the late P. Ramlee ever featured in the Bangsawang. Of course he was in the movies in the 50s by Cathay organization.
Yes.
And then my second question is, I understand for all I know that this redivision was acquired by a private individual.
Acquired
Acquired by a private individual. I was just wondering why was it redivision? Why was it not sold to the government? You see?
Okay. That one I
got
cannot.
competition with MediaCorp or something.
Okay. I answer the second part. First of all, it's a cable version. It's considered private. So I do not know the reason why, but in the first place, it was a private radio station, not a. So we have a public broadcasting and also the private. Like now we have a cable TV. We have so many private channels. About the P. Ramlee, okay, P. Ramlee never performed, as far as I know, in a Bangsawan. But when he do the films, some of the actors that he uses or he engaged for the film industry are actually Bangsawan trained. Some of it is this actor S. Kadarisman. I think he usually, if he plays in the traditional movie, he will become like the Sultan and all those. Because I think most of the good actors actually are trained from the Bangsawan. Just imagine, even right now, I think within the industry, they will say that those who actually practice in theatre are actually more expressive and more versatile as compared to those on TV. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, thanks.
Good evening, sir. I also have two questions. My first question is that this Bangsawan actually transferred to radio. Is it happening after the demise of the Shaw movies and Cathay Christ, or is it actually like when Bangsawan diminished, one go towards the Malay films and one goes towards the radio industry? This is my first question.
Okay.
And second question is that does NLB currently have actually recordings? Like, do they actually keep recordings like the daily radio, all this? Because I'm not sure that back then this radio stations actually keep a copy or archive their programs. Yeah, thank you.
See, we have colleagues here from Archive to help you with their questions. Okay, first of all, how does the industry work? Sometimes you see, for example, in Bangsawan thrive, then it started to go down because of the coming of the film industry. People rather go and see films and all those. Then once they start go down, radio come up. And that's where I think they started to play with the radio, shifted the Bangsawan to radio. So eventually TV came. Bangsawan moved into TV. So you see how in terms of the formatting of the genre into the different types of broadcast in terms of from live performance to radio, then to TV. Okay, so it's actually an evolution. It's not as simple as one died, one goes up. Sometimes it goes cross. Yeah? Yes, correct. Yeah. So even right now, occasionally, like if you see in the 80s, they tried to revive the Bangsawan, like having stage performance in Victoria Theatre, for example. But it's getting more expensive, and the talent also, I think not many people are able to execute that. And also, in terms of the cost, so it moved into television. So they have a series in television for bangsawan. And to make it more consumable, they have now like bangsawan but comedy. So people likes comedy, you see. So it changes from something like serious now become a comedy, so that a lot more people can accept the bangsawan. Okay. The day-to-day, I don't think the earlier ones we have, but I think some of it like important announcement or speeches, all those over the radio, we do have at National Archive. I mean, Function, correct me if I'm wrong. Because I don't think we keep everything in terms of all the programs.
Hi, I'm from the National Archives. Just let me share a little bit. I'm not really an expert on the audiovisual materials, but I do know that we do have a significant collection of the radiovision recordings at the National Archives, which you can listen to at Level 11's reading room or at the National Archives reading room as well. And we do not have the earlier ones because when it was transferred and donated to us, not everything is in the best condition. So some of them were moldy, or the tapes has all wrinkle and all that stuff. And of course, as you know, tapes back then is not cheap. So a lot of times they were recorded over again and again. So that erases the past materials as well. So we do have a significant collection which you can actually listen to at the archives reading room. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, at the last count, I checked, we have about like 2,000 to 3,000, but some of it is mostly a Chinese program. That is in the 70s onwards. Yeah?
I just want to ask a technical question with regards to archives for the audio material, whether it's translated to text, everything.
I don't think it's translated automatically. What I know
or transcripted.
Some of the items, yes, we have it transcribed, so you can actually read the content. So you just go to archive online, and if you look for certain radio scripts or radio broadcasts that came out, some of it is already transcripted into the text, so you can just read it instead of listening it. Because sometimes, like what Function says, that the quality, especially the older one, over time, when you even digitize it, the quality tends to deteriorate. Yeah. So and sometimes certain words you like, okay, whether this is a word or not. You copy wrongly, especially when you are doing research, it gives a different meaning to what you heard and what was actually written. Yeah, some do have, but I don't say it's everything. Yeah, the important one should have.
I noticed that the radio magazines were all donated. So I assume it predates the requirement of publication to be submitted for archival and all those things.
Okay.
So could you elaborate? I mean, could you give us when was this requirement to submit publication for archival and all those things?
We do have what you call under the legal deposits. What I'm showing you is some of the donated items that we have, but we do have. If you are referring to the legal deposit, some of these items do have in our collection itself. So the only thing sometimes the donated items is what you call, we fill up some of the gaps that we might not be having. And also during the earlier parts of every publications, although we say that it needs to submit, not everyone submitted. So, but donated items like this is also good to fill up what we miss and make the collection more wholesome, more complete. Yeah, but we do have in legal deposits some of these publications.
You mean since, that mean that when the publication started, there was a requirement that they have to get permit and also have to submit for archival?
Depending on the year. Yeah, I think the legal deposit started only, let me see. Let me check for you the legal deposit. I think, yeah, the earlier ones, because there's no so-called requirement to get the the ISBN, whatever, and mostly we have collected, but then it's sporadic here and there. They have like gaps here and there, lah. Yeah. I'll find out the dates for you when it started, because the earlier collection usually we do have here and there, but it's not complete. So that's why we highlighted the donors collection, because the donors collection actually fill up that gaps. Yeah.
I've got two questions. One, I've been doing research into the history of Singapore fantasy and horror, and I know that there are, and I'm trying to figure out how much it was represented in radio drama, like fantasy and horror. I know there's some elements of it in M.K. Narayanan's crime stories, but I'm wondering how much you know about how it was represented in the Malay and Chinese form. The second question I've got is, I'm so glad you mentioned Jalilawati. She's actually on my T-shirt. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I was wondering about, could you tell us more about the role of women in across media in also the Chinese and Tamil scenes?
Okay. Tamil and the Chinese scene. I cannot say much about that because I didn't really go into it, but at least for the Malay, they do have a significant role. Unfortunately, usually, especially in the early parts, like I mentioned, Jalilawati was like one of the 8 women writers in the 50s that started in the 50s. But having said that, even I think I was told that some of the publication or some of her writings is using pseudonyms. Somehow, if you look at the pioneer writers, a lot are represented by the male writers compared to the women. I think it's across here and across the causeway during that time. I'm not sure about the Chinese or even in English. Somehow, the industry is dominated by the men to a certain extent. Basically, because of maybe the concept of the woman back then is basically on a back end role, that kind of things. But over radios, we have a lot of women playwrights, famous, Mazna Haji Abdul Hamid, lately, even until now, we have like Hatina Hamad. So all these are well represented to a certain extent. And we are talking about horror. You mentioned Jalilawati. All along, I see people from various generations keep on telling me one of the best horror story writers is Jalilawati. Unfortunately, we are not able to get the works. You see, this is stat, sorry. Okay, early parts, usually there's no appreciation. I'm not sure, maybe sometimes when it comes down to the family, there's not, I will say this, they are not able to see the gems in terms of those scripts. So the problem is also in terms of the Malay community. We have a proverbs that says that 7 kali pindah papa, meaning if you move or shifted houses 7 times, eventually you become poor. The concept, it took me a while to understand it, because every time we shift, especially in the context of Singapore, right, we will tend to throw half of what we have. So along the way, by the time you reach your 7 move, right? So what do you have? So a lot of these things sometimes you never know. Sometimes, especially now, next week you try to go into the various housing estates, and maybe you start see people throwing things. Maybe you can find some antique books at the rubbish bin. You never know, because that's how the concept of our life here in Singapore. But like I mentioned, horror story actually plays a very dominant part of radio. Somehow the Malay until now, if you look, there's a story MJ12, Mystery Jam 12, you know. It was a very popular, the DJ will talk about, and the horror story, the ghost story, all the hantus. Somehow it's one of the most popular program on radio. I don't know why. Somehow we all like to be haunted. So, like you say, in terms of the horror stories, yes, it does play that role. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think the early part we are not able to document, especially like, I think the one that we have, I think, is the late Mr. Osman Wo. Until now, he's known to be like one of the great horror story from Utusan.
He's still like, he's the earliest writer, a horror fiction writer I can find on record. But I feel like surely there were people before him.
There
like,
is.
So,
there is.
But like, do you know of who was there before him?
There is. Like I said, a lot of things, especially in the Malay communities, a lot of things are through word of mouth. You know, the storyteller, and getting people to write down their name. Especially if you look into our old texts, even in the manuscripts, they will just put humble young fakir means I who knows nothing. You know, and he's written these manuscripts. Then he wrote, because there's no I somehow in the community. It's usually anonymous. So by Osman Wo, because he was working for the Utusan Melayu, the newspaper at that time, I think, and his series was one of the very popular one. So that's why when people ask, it's always him, because he's something that you can see, you can read. The rest is like, I think if you ask any of your Malay friends, I think most of their best horror story is still from friends, from grandfather, from relative, all that kind of things, you know? Because that culture somehow is spread that way. Especially a horror story. You know, you go camping, you sure have horror story. Those who go for national service definitely have some horror story or the hantu story to tell to the next generation. So that's the horror story.
Yeah, just a quick one. Just wondering, what National Archive, do they still keep audio recording of the Mr. Rajaratnam, the late Minister for Foreign Affairs and Culture? Because I used to tell stories.
Yes,
in the olden days.
I think there was a book also on his place. Yeah. But I'm not sure about the story lah. But mostly you will find his speeches, I think, in archive lah.
Thank you very much. Due to the shortage of time, we have time for one last question. Thanks.
Yeah.
Storytelling within the Malay community was mostly oral. There was no written tradition. Tradition of writing it down.
The tradition of writing there is, but more towards some of those things, more towards the oral culture. It's like from word of mouth is more or less. Only when they started to write that you can find some of this in written form. But basically, you must also understand the literacy rate of the community back then. You know, you got one person who is able to read will become like the newscaster for the whole kampong. You know, they got the newspaper, then the whole kampong will congregate. Okay, today the government announced this, you know. So mostly it's not as rampant as what we wanted it to be or what we expected it to be. Yeah?
But even in Malay,
Only the elite will be able to write. Yeah, and the best story usually comes from the ground.
Okay, thanks very much, Juffri, for sharing, and thank you for being such a good audience. Please join us again next month for another sharing session from our Librarian's World. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.